Most beginners see a computer as one giant mystery box, but once you start to understand how all the parts connect together, it suddenly becomes way less intimidating. And honestly, this is where the A Plus starts getting fun. Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Slav, and welcome back to the Level Up series. In the last episode, we covered the basic hardware components inside a computer, but today we're going to take it a step further. Today we're going to go inside the PC to understand how all these components actually connect together, because once you understand that, troubleshooting, building computers starts making a lot more sense. And throughout this episode, I'm going to throw in some CompTIA-style questions, performance-based questions, and troubleshooting scenarios similar to what you may actually see on the A+ exam. Let's start out with the motherboard. The motherboard is basically the backbone of the entire computer. Every major component connects to it in some way. The CPU plugs into the motherboard, RAM plugs into the motherboard, storage devices connect to it, graphics cards connect to it, even your power supply feeds power through the motherboard. You can think of the motherboard as like a highway system or a city map. It controls how components communicate with each other. As we talked about in the last episode, motherboards come in different sizes called form factor. ATX is the standard full-size motherboard, micro ATX is slightly smaller, and mini ITX is designed for compact small form factor systems. The motherboard also contains the chipset, which helps manage communication between the CPU, RAM, storage devices, USB ports, and PCIe devices. So here's the question style that you should see on the exam. Which motherboard form factor is most commonly used in compact small form factor PCs? Answer choices: ATX, micro ATX, mini ATX, eATX. The correct answer here would be C, mini ITX, because mini ITX boards are specifically designed for compact systems. So a lot of times CompTIA likes to give you two answer choices that make sense and two answer choices that make absolutely no sense at all, where one answer choice makes the absolute most sense, and that's the answer choice that you want to go with. Now, sometimes CompTIA will give you at least some credit for selecting a answer choice that makes some sense. I don't know exactly how CompTIA handles their grading, so I won't know one way or the other how questions are graded, but I do know that some questions have more weight than others. So something as simple as this may only count for, let's say, 10 points if you get it correct, and then something that would require a lot of thought process and may not exactly be relevant to the exam that you're taking, or sometimes they have sample questions for their next variation. So for example, you may see questions that CompTIA would put on the 22013-01, and if you get that question right, it may hold more weight since it would not necessarily be something within your study guide, your CompTIA branded study guides. So as an example, if you have 100 questions and the passing score is 700, don't think that just because you get 70 questions correct, or you know 100% 70 of your questions are correct, that you can just skip over the other 30. You should take all of your questions seriously, and you should answer them to the best of your ability to maximize your score at the end. But I digress. Let's move on to CPU sockets and compatibility. The CPU socket is the physical slot on the motherboard where the processor is installed. Different CPUs require different socket types. For AMD, common sockets include AM4 and AM5. For Intel, you'll commonly see LGA 1151, LGA 1200, and LGA 1700. One of the biggest beginner mistakes is buying a CPU that doesn't match this motherboard socket, and compatibility goes beyond just the CPU socket. Some motherboards only support DDR4 memory, while newer boards may require DDR5 memory. This means that you should always check CPU, motherboard, and RAM compatibility before upgrading a system. Another CompTIA style question you may see: a technician attempts to install an Intel LGA 1700 CPU and an older LGA 1151 motherboard. What is most likely to happen? The CPU will overheat, the CPU will not fit correctly, the system will downgrade performance, or D, the BIOS will automatically convert compatibility. The correct answer is B. The CPU will not fit correctly. CPUs and CPU sockets are not interchangeable, especially with Intel. Now let's say the question was, a technician attempts to replace a Ryzen 5 5600 CPU with a Ryzen 5 5500 CPU, what is most likely to happen? The correct answer with that question would be C. The system will downgrade performance. Technically, it's the most correct answer because a Ryzen 5 5600 CPU and a Ryzen 5 5500 CPU are both AM4 sockets. So that would mean that the AMD CPUs will both fit in AM4 socket motherboards. And what happens whenever you downgrade your CPU? Well, you essentially downgrade your performance. Now, CompTIA probably wouldn't say downgrade in the question. That would kind of make it blatantly obvious, as opposed to showing 5600 to a 5500 CPU. Obviously, that is a downgrade in and of itself. But just note that the two most incorrect answers here are A and D, because the CPU overheating has nothing to do with the CPU itself. It all has to do with the liquid cooling or fan cooling, and the BIOS never automatically converts compatibility when it comes to CPUs. So if you weren't sure what the answer was, you have the 50-50 shot of B, the CPU will not fit correctly, or C, the system will downgrade performance. But as for this question specifically, since we're comparing an LGA 1700 CPU and an LGA 1151 CPU, the CPUs just won't fit flat out. Another potential question here would be a technician attempts to replace an all-in-one liquid cooler with a CPU fan. What is most likely to happen? In this case, the answer would be A, the CPU may overheat. Now, we don't know for 100% sure if that would actually happen, since we don't know if the all-in-one liquid cooler is already kind of at capacity. There's different variations to liquid cooling, obviously. The smaller the radiator, the more likely the CPU will overheat in a high-performance system. So you would need a bigger radiator in order to correctly cool the CPU, depending on what you're trying to do. In a low-performance system, a fan cooler is most likely what you want to install regardless, because it's so cheap. You already have a low performance system, so there's no reason for an all-in-one liquid cooler, because you're not trying to do high performance tasks. Just trying to throw some variation on CompTIA questions, because that is what CompTIA does. You may see that on your exam, where you have your first question, some, very straightforward question and answer, and then later on down the line, say question 50, you have the exact same question, just in a different format or looking for a different answer. So a lot of times CompTIA just likes to nitpick the vocabulary out and just swap and replace. You'll see that very often on CompTIA questions. Moving on to RAM slots and memory channels. RAM installs into slots on the motherboard called DIMM slots. Most desktop motherboards have either 2 or 4 RAM slots. And something beginners often don't realize is that slot placement actually matters. Many systems use something called dual channel memory. The easiest way to think about dual channel memory is like opening additional traffic lanes for data. Using 2 matching RAM sticks in the correct slots allow the CPU to access memory more efficiently. That's why motherboards often color code RAM slots. More RAM will help with multitasking, while faster RAM improves responsiveness. And yes, opening 47 Chrome tabs absolutely can destroy your RAM. The easiest way I've found to make sure that RAM is installed correctly is just simply opening up your task manager and navigating to your performance tab. Your performance tab will show you how much memory your system has, how much it's being used, and will also show you CPU utilization and other worthwhile data. But checking out your memory performance will showcase how much RAM is installed, and then you can confirm or deny whether your RAM was installed properly. Question 3. A user complains that their PC becomes extremely slow when multitasking with many browser tabs open. Which upgrade would most likely improve performance? We have A, additional RAM, B, a larger monitor, C, additional case fans, or D, a new keyboard. The answer is A, additional RAM. Obviously, a larger monitor isn't going to impact performance at all whatsoever. Additional case fans may help performance if the system was slow due to overheating, and also D, a new keyboard, would have no impact on performance at all. So just like normal CompTIA questions, again, 2 very easy answer choices that you can knock out are B and D. But since we're talking about multitasking with multiple browser tabs open, obviously we want additional RAM. Moving on to storage connections. Storage devices hold your operating system, applications, files, and even your games. Traditional hard drives, or hard disk drives, use spinning disks and mechanical parts, so they're more prone to breaking down. SSDs, or solid state drives, use flash memory, and they are much faster. Next up, we have NVMe drives, which connect directly through PCIe lanes on your motherboard for even faster performance. That's why modern systems boot almost instantly compared to older PCs. SATA is the older connection standard. M.2 refers to the physical form factor commonly used by NVMe drives. One of the easiest upgrades that you can make to older computers is replacing a hard disk drive with a solid state drive. Let's move on to question 4. Which storage type provides the fastest performance? A. Hard disk drive, B. SATA SSD, C. NVMe SSD, or D. Optical drive? The answer is C. NVMe SSD. As we know from this previous infographic, hard disk drives are the oldest and slowest, but will hold the most data for the least amount of money. So they're very commonly used in budget systems. SATA SSD is the next step up. So if you were pushing for an upgrade, you would most likely go for the hard disk drive to a SATA SSD drive. The fastest and most modern is the NVMe SSD, with the highest read and write speeds. Next up, let's talk about PCIe expansion slots. PCIe stands for Peripheral Component Interconnect Express. These expansion slots allow you to install additional hardware. The most common device installed into a PCIe slot is your graphics card, but PCIe is also used for things like your Wi-Fi cards, sound cards, capture cards, storage adapters, etc. PCIe slots come in different sizes, like x1, x4, x8, and x16. Generally speaking, more lanes is going to mean more bandwidth. Question 5. Which PCIe slot is most commonly used for dedicated graphics cards? PCIe X1, PCIe X4, PCIe X8, or PCIe X16? The correct answer is D, PCIe X16. Here we have an infographic of the different PCIe slots and what most commonly goes inside of them. Next up, let's talk about power connectors. Every component inside your PC requires power from the PSU, or the power supply unit. The main motherboard connector is the 24-pin ATX connector. You'll also commonly see the 8-pin CPU power connectors, the PCIe GPU power connectors, or even the SATA power connectors. One very common beginner mistake is forgetting the CPU power connector near the top of the motherboard, and when that happens, the system may appear completely dead. Next question, which connector provides primary power to the motherboard? The SATA power, the Molex connector, the 24-pin ATX connector, or the PCIe 6-pin connector? The answer is C, 24-pin ATX connector. Our SATA power cables connect to hard disk drives or SATA SSD drives. The PCIe 6-pin connector would plug into your GPU, most likely. And the Molex connector is a legacy power connector. It's also good to know where answer choices best fit in other questions. Like I said, CompTIA likes to interconnect their questions, so they'll likely rearrange questions or replace vocabulary words to try to throw you off. So as an example, a different question that CompTIA may ask, which connector would most likely provide power to a dedicated graphics card? In that case, the answer would be PCIe 6-pin connector. Or, which connector provides primary power to the CPU? And that could be the 4-pin CPU power connector or the 8-pin CPU power connector, all depending on the PSU that you have, all depending on the motherboard that you have, etc., etc. But for the CompTIA A+, they will keep questions very generic and straightforward because this, again, is an entry-level certification and not meant to be advanced. Now, let's talk about cooling. Modern CPUs and GPUs generate a lot of heat. If temperature becomes too high, systems can throttle performance, crash, or even shut down. There are two main cooling methods, air cooling and liquid cooling. Air cooling uses heat sinks and fans. Liquid cooling uses a radiator, liquid loop, and a pump. Most users are completely fine with air cooling. You'll also hear terms like positive airflow and negative airflow. Positive airflow means more intake fans than exhaust fans. Negative inflow and negative airflow, vice versa. Finally, thermal paste. Thermal paste helps to improve heat transfers between the CPU and the cooler. And no, more thermal paste does not mean better cooling. On to our CompTIA A-style question number 7. What is the main purpose of thermal paste? A. Increase fan speed. B. Reduce electrical resistance. C. Improve heat transfer. Or D. Increase airflow. The answer is C. Improve heat transfer. Now let's move on to our last section, real-world troubleshooting. A lot of computer issues come down to hardware installation mistakes. Some examples may include RAM not fully seated, CPU power disconnected, monitor plugged into motherboard instead of the GPU, overheating due to dust, or even a dead power supply. One of the biggest beginner mistakes that I still see to this day is plugging the monitor into the motherboard instead of the graphics card. Honestly, almost everyone does this at least once. Now let's check out question 8. A user installs a dedicated graphics card but receives no display signal. The monitor cable is connected to the motherboard video output. What should the technician do first? A. Replace the motherboard. B. Reseat the RAM. C. Connect the monitor to the graphics card. Or D. Replace the power supply. The answer is C. Connect the monitor to the graphics card. Replacing the motherboard would be the very last step that I would do, as well as reseating the RAM would be the second thing that I would do. Replacing the power supply would probably be the third in this list that I would do. Like I said, it's important for questions like these to have a reasoning for the other answer choices, just in case CompTIA decides to throw you for a loop and ask a similar question, but then ask what should the technician do second or third or last in their troubleshooting step-by-step process. Now let's move on to a performance-based question. This one deals with hardware compatibility. A technician is building a new PC. Select the compatible hardware combination. We've got an AM4 motherboard, DDR4 RAM, various CPU choices, DDR5 RAM, and AM5 CPU choices. In this scenario, we can see that we only have an AM4 motherboard, so likely we will need to make sure that we select an AM4 CPU as well as DDR4 RAM. So since we have an AM4 motherboard, DDR4 RAM is the compatible choice, as there are no AM4 motherboards with DDR5 capability. This is just another example of how AMD streamlines their approach to motherboards, CPU compatibility, and RAM compatibility, versus Intel where you just have an extra step of necessary research to confirm which DDR generation the motherboard is compatible with. So since all we have is an AM4 motherboard, DDR5 RAM, and all the AM5 CPU choices are out. So make sure you select the right motherboard, RAM, and CPU. Moving on to another potential performance-based question. Let's work on no display troubleshooting. A newly built computer powers on, fans spin normally, but there is no display signal. In a question like this, CompTIA would most likely have you order from least to greatest, or first to last, the troubleshooting steps that you should follow. First, we would check the monitor connection. Second step would be the GPU power. Third step, the CPU power. And lastly, RAM seating. The reasoning being you would check the monitor connection first to ensure you are connected to the correct output. The GPU is what gives you your display, so you would check that second. And then finally, CPU and RAM are a bit of a toss-up, but the CPU power connector can be a most likely to be the issue, whereas RAM seating should give you a notification that the RAM is not properly installed once you boot up the PC. So seeing no display, you definitely wouldn't see RAM seating as an issue, thus making it the last possible troubleshooting step. Now let's move on to a real interview troubleshooting challenge. This is something that you may actually hear in a real IT technical interview. The interviewer asks, a user upgraded their RAM, and now the PC powers on, but it won't boot. Walk me through your troubleshooting process. Here's how I would approach it. First, we would verify the RAM compatibility with the motherboard. Once we verified compatibility, we would reseat the RAM. If that still doesn't work, we would test one RAM stick at a time. Maybe one of the RAM sticks is defective. Next, we would check the motherboard slot configuration. Maybe it's just seated improperly. Next to last, a step could be to clear the CMOS if necessary. Finally, my last step would be to verify BIOS support. The idea here is that we tackle the low-hanging fruit first, the most likely and least interactive options first. So obviously verifying RAM compatibility is going to be very quick and straightforward. Once you verify that, you know if you've got the incorrect or correct RAM. Then oftentimes users incorrectly seat the RAM, so just unplugging it and plugging it back in may solve the issue. Then we know if we still have issues with booting up the PC, we know that it's possible one of the RAM sticks may be defective and needing of a replacement. And if that doesn't fix it, then we're going to need additional steps, like checking the motherboard slot configuration, clearing the CMOS battery, and then verifying BIOS support as our last option. That's just how real-world troubleshooting works in IT. Now that we understand how the inside of a PC connects together, the next step is going to be diving deeper into storage and system performance. In the next episode, we're going to dive deeper into hard disk drives, solid-state drives, NVMe drives, RAID configurations, and how storage impacts real-world performance. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know what topics you want covered next. And as always, keep leveling up, and I'll see you all in the next episode.